Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. No matter where you live in the country right now, you're probably experiencing some cooler air temps. Fall has really started to roll in pretty much across the entire country, and with those falling air temps, we're going to have falling water temps, and we've got the fall transition that's really starting to hit home. You've got a lot of bass moving from summer and late summer, early fall areas, starting to think about feeding up and then moving into the wintering areas. And with that, anytime this transition's happening, you got to start to think about throwing a jerk bait. Jerk baits are such a good bait at mimicking those dying bait fish. Generally speaking, the biggest shad die off or bait fish die off will actually happen later in the year when the water temps are at their coolest time. But a lot of times what happens is you have some of the weakest bait fish, you've got some that are sick. They tend to die off in the fall period when water temps actually start dropping down, but aren't quite at the coolest time for the year. And with that, those bait fish tend to just flutter around in the water column. They make an easy meal for the bass, and that's what a jerk bait does. It really does a good job at mimicking a dying bait fish. But at the same time, you're talking about a lot of the bass really starting to transition their diet from what may have been a lot of crayfish, a lot of panfish, over to much more of a shad based or a pelagic style based bait fish. Even up here in the North Country, a lot of our lakes don't have shad, but we still do have potentially alewife, or you've got cisco, you've got other oily fish that the bass really like to feed on. So a lot of those fish tend to move shallow this time of year, which means they're up higher in the water column, which means a jerkbait, which tends to get down anywhere from 0 to 10 feet, is going to be in the strike zone. And again, if you're talking about mimicking the forage, a jerkbait's a really good one to use. But having said that, today we've got hundreds of different style of jerkbaits. So I want to walk you through some of my favorites, and I'm going to do it based more on depth that they fish and style of it. Generally speaking, this is one of my absolute go-tos. This is the Berkeley Stunna 112 in the Northern Lights color. You can see that it's pretty transparent, got a little bit of purple side, a little bit of chartreuse, and a green back. Just a dynamite color, but it's really more about this size. This is one of the best all-around jerkbait sizes for a couple of reasons. One, you can cast this thing an extremely long distance. This jerkbait's got a tungsten transfer system. A lot of the high-end jerkbaits on the market have that, which just enables you to cast significantly further than we used to be able to do. It also helps you get the bait a little bit deeper, which is one of the things that this size tends to do better than some of your smaller jerkbaits. So you can get it down in that 6 to 10 foot range. But more than anything, it just provides an easy meal. It's big enough to entice some big fish, but it's also small enough to entice a lot of numbers of bass to come eat it. But you got to have something like this Berkeley Stunna in that 112 size. The 110 megabass is another one. Most companies at this point offer something that's roughly 4.5 inches long. Just a dynamite bait. But having said that, there's a lot of different sizes that I like to use. One of which is to actually drop down a size. So this is the Megabass 110 Junior. Just a dynamite little jerkbait. Does not get quite as deep, doesn't have the same slashing motion, but it's one that can generate a lot of bites. If you're fishing a heavily pressured body of water, you're fishing a body of water where maybe the average size is a little bit smaller. This is where I really like to throw something like this junior size. Just an absolute killer. It is one that catches a pile of fish for me, and it's a bait that I know I can really toss around under those really pressured days and still generate some good bites. So you want to have a place for some of your smaller jerk baits as well. Now, having said that, you probably want a place to have some bigger jerk baits too. There's a handful on the market that I really like. This is a Megabass Canada. So this is a very large jerk bait. You got to throw it on some of your heavier bait casting gear. I generally tend to throw jerk baits on spinning gear. I throw it on a shorter rod, so a 6.9. It's a custom built rod that I like. It's the SJ812. So it's just a lighter rod, but I like it on spinning gear for a couple of reasons. One, it's a lot less fatigue on me to work the bait. I feel like I can cast them a lot further. And I like to throw it on 6 or 8 pound tests, which I feel like performs better on spinning reels than bait casters. Now that's my standard setup, but if I'm going with something bigger like this, I'll be throwing this on a 7.3 medium heavy with probably 15-pound fluorocarbon, 100% Berkeley fluorocarbon. And this to me is a very specific bait when I'm throwing, either I'm on a lake that's got a lot of really good sized fish, a place like Gunnersville or Chickamauga. If I'm fishing a lake that's getting a ton of jerkbait pressure, that's also when going with something that's got a completely different appearance and a different size profile will really help you. But more than anything, this really comes in handy if I know that the bass are feeding on bigger prey. If it's much more of that gizzard shad, or even if you're on a place that's got a lot more of your Cisco or your alewife, bigger bait fish, I tend to have a lot of good luck with a bigger jerkbait. Now, I will say my bites drop off, but the average size does definitely increase. So from that standpoint, it's worth throwing. It's one of those baits for me a lot of times if I'm fishing a tournament and I'm concentrating on jerk baits and I've got a decent limit in the boat, I'll definitely start working in this Canada. It just seems like, again, you don't get a ton of bites, but when you get bit, they're just generally better. Now, I will also add, I don't like to fish this quite as much as a traditional jerkbait where I'm really twitching the rod tip hard, getting my bait to slash back and forth. I tend to fish this much more on a sweep style. So I'll really just kind of sweep the rod, let it sit, sweep the rod, let it sit. To me, it just seems to work better. I can't say I don't get the same slashing motion quite out of this as I would some of the other jerkbaits, but it works really well on a sweeping motion. And I've caught some really big fish on this guy. The last jerkbait, though, that really comes into play for me is an old classic favorite of mine. Now, this is the old Rapala floating minnow. So this size specifically, I think, is the F11, but I'll go all the way up to what was the old Husky size. And I'll go smaller than this too. But really what I want to get at here is your floating Rapalas can be an absolute dynamite fish catcher anytime you're talking about cold water periods, but where you get a really warm day during the fall and you'll have some of those really shallow backwater areas or your shallow bays will warm up pretty substantially compared to the main lake area. You'll have a lot of largemouth that get up in some of those shallow bays and will start roaming around, and I'll catch a pile of fish on this little floating Rapala. It's a dynamite little bait. Doesn't have any rattles in it. It's just very stealth. You can't cast them as far as some of the other traditional baits, but it's one of those baits that, a lot of times I'm not necessarily working it like a jerk bait. I'm actually twitching it on the surface, or I'll reel it 10 feet and then kill it, let it float up to the surface, twitch it a few times, reel it some more. It's just a very, very good bait anytime that those fish are in the shallows looking for some warmth, because we've had a little warming spell that pulled through. Same thing happens in the spring. Once you start getting some of those really warm spring days and you start getting some of those shallow weed-filled bays, or those bays that might fill over with pads, I'm talking only a couple of foot of water, 2-3 foot of water, those fish will get into those areas because they're really absorbing a lot of heat, and that little bait twitched around will generate a lot of strikes for you. So these are go-tos for me when we're talking about jerkbait fishing. A lot of different colors, that's a whole nother conversation, but you need to recognize that all 4 of these body styles and sizes can really come into play. It's not just simply go with the standard jerkbait all of the time. You do want to play around with them a little bit, and I think what you'll find is there are certain days, certain times where one bait will generate a lot more strikes over the other. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.